Barack Obama sat across from Rachel Maddow and, with a steady voice, revealed private conversations that shook Washington to its core. Conversations Donald Trump never wanted you to hear. The camera light turned red, and millions of people at home leaned forward without even realizing it. Barack Obama, who had kept a careful distance from the political storm since leaving office, was finally speaking live on MSNBC. Rachel Maddow's eyes locked on him, her voice steady, but the tension in the studio could be felt even through the screen. This wasn't a casual interview. This was a reckoning. Rachel didn't waste time. "Mr. President, you've been relatively quiet. Tonight, you asked for this slot. Why now?" Obama adjusted slightly in his chair, his calm presence almost eerie compared to the noise Americans had grown used to under Donald Trump. He glanced at the audience, then right into the camera. His first words weren't fiery. They were quiet, steady, the kind of tone that made people instinctively listen. "Because," he said, pausing as if weighing every syllable, "what I've been told in private by people who still sit in positions of power cannot stay behind closed doors any longer." That sentence alone sent shockwaves. Maddow's eyebrows lifted slightly. She pressed forward. "Are you saying sitting members of Congress are privately voicing concerns about President Trump?" Obama leaned in, his voice steady. "I'm saying they're terrified. They're watching standards slip. They're watching institutions weaken. And they're afraid of what comes next." The words cut through the noise of everyday politics like a blade. Viewers at home, whether in small apartments in Philadelphia or suburban houses in Phoenix, suddenly felt the room around them go quiet. The usual background chatter of dinner, kids, or TV faded. Obama had everyone's full attention. Rachel's professionalism held, but her questions sharpened. "Can you give an example of these concerns?" Obama hesitated, not in uncertainty, but with the weight of knowing the magnitude of what he was about to say. "I recently attended a bipartisan national security retreat," he began, "and during that retreat, several Republican lawmakers spoke candidly. They admitted that the dismissal of experienced intelligence officials, men and women who've spent decades protecting this country, wasn't just reckless. It was dangerous. One senator told me plainly, 'We may cross a line before anyone can stop it.' The studio, though filled with staff and crew, seemed frozen. Even the faint scratching of a pen stopped. Rachel's next words came slowly, deliberate. "Which senator said that?" Obama didn't flinch. "Lisa Murkowski." The name hung in the air. A Republican senator. From Alaska. Not a Democrat. Not a pundit. A sitting member of Trump's own party. Maddow glanced at her notes, then back at Obama, her expression betraying the significance of the admission. At that very moment, living rooms across America erupted. Some shouted at the TV, stunned that a Republican senator would confide something so damning. Others whispered, "Finally," under their breath, relieved someone on the inside had spoken the truth. Social media, though just seconds behind, was already beginning to catch fire. Obama continued, "This isn't about politics. It's about whether Americans can trust their institutions. When people in power begin doubting whether the president listens to intelligence briefings, when they fear national security is treated like a campaign rally, then we all have reason to be concerned." Rachel pushed harder. "Are you accusing President Trump of mishandling classified information?" Obama didn't raise his voice, but his words carried weight. "I'm saying there are Republicans who worry he already has." The audience in the studio didn't clap. They didn't gasp. They just sat there, stunned into silence, reflecting the mood of the entire country. For years, Obama had avoided the spotlight, careful not to overshadow the new administration. But tonight, his timing, his delivery, and his choice of words carried the kind of power only he could wield, calm, precise, unflinching. Rachel leaned back, a rare pause in her relentless questioning. Why bring this forward now? Why here in front of millions, knowing it will light a firestorm? Obama's gaze didn't waver from the lens. Because silence is no longer an option. I don't want to look back one day and know that I stayed quiet when the country needed clarity. It was a line that would be replayed on every channel within hours. A line that ordinary people would repeat at work, in schools, in bars, at kitchen tables. Obama had just drawn a line between silence and action, and millions of Americans were choosing which side they were on. The segment was barely halfway through, but already, history felt like it was being written in real time. And as Rachel shuffled her notes, trying to contain the storm now brewing, viewers across the nation knew something monumental had just begun. But what came next would shift the story from shocking television to a national turning point. Phones buzzed almost immediately after Obama's first statement. Families in living rooms from Tucson to Cincinnati turned to one another with the same question. Did he really just say that? Cable producers scrambled to rearrange the night's programming. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were posted online. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, every platform carried his words before the segment even wrapped. Obama had pierced the noise of everyday politics, and the reaction was instant. But while the internet exploded, the country outside those screens was already tense. For months, Americans had lived in a whirlwind of breaking news alerts, controversial tweets, and late-night firings. Trust in government was slipping, and not just in Washington. Small towns in Arizona, sprawling suburbs outside Dallas, rural communities in Idaho, everyone felt it. The question was always the same. If the people at the top can't be trusted, what happens to the rest of us? In this moment, Obama's words hit harder because they weren't spoken from a campaign stage. They weren't meant to win votes. They were delivered with the tone of someone who had already carried the burden of the presidency and knew the cost of carelessness. Rachel Maddow sensed the power of the moment and leaned in again. Mr. President, the country has lived with division before. What makes this moment different? Obama's expression turned serious. We've always had disagreements. Democrats, Republicans, that's part of democracy. But this is about the guardrails that keep America safe. When you push them aside, when you treat security as a political game, the entire system is at risk. And people inside the government know it. He paused, his hands resting calmly on the desk. I've heard it directly from them. The weight of those words wasn't lost on anyone watching. This wasn't anonymous leaks in a newspaper. This was a former president saying, on national television, that sitting lawmakers and officials feared for the stability of the country. Meanwhile, in homes across the nation, the reactions were deeply personal. In Indianapolis, a retired Marine named Douglas Ingram sat with his wife, shaking his head. He's right. You can't fire every intelligence officer who tells you what you don't want to hear. That's not leadership. That's chaos. In Sacramento, a college student named Erin Wallace texted her roommate in disbelief. Did Murkowski really say that? A Republican? This changes everything. Even in places where Trump's support remained strong, people were unsettled. In Oklahoma City, construction foreman Tom Reyes argued with his co-workers at a diner counter. I voted for Trump, but I don't like the sound of this. If Obama's quoting Republicans, that means something's wrong. The air felt charged, like the entire country was holding its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Rachel pressed forward. So you're saying there's a real risk here, that it's not just political theater, it's bigger? Obama nodded. It's bigger than any one election. It's bigger than me or Senator Murkowski or even Donald Trump. It's about whether America can be trusted around the world. If allies stop sharing intelligence with us because they don't believe it's safe in our hands, we lose more than influence. We lose security. His words drew a straight line between everyday Americans and the larger world they often felt disconnected from. Suddenly, people in Kansas City or Boise could imagine how a careless word in Washington might mean their soldiers overseas had less protection, or that foreign governments might withhold information that could stop an attack. The interview shifted again when Rachel asked, "Do you believe President Trump listens to his intelligence briefings?" Obama hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. I think he listens when it suits him, and that's not enough. The silence after that remark carried more power than any raised voice. Rachel didn't jump in. She let the statement hang in the air, knowing viewers at home were replaying it in their minds. At that exact moment, the country's divide widened. Supporters of Trump rushed online to defend him, blasting Obama as a deep state insider. Critics of Trump, however, celebrated Obama's courage to say what they felt but hadn't heard spoken out loud. The split screen of American life had never been clearer. Still, the one unshakable fact was this. Obama had planted a seed of doubt in millions who might never have questioned Trump before. Not with anger, not with insults, but with calm authority. Rachel's final question in that block of the interview cut through the noise. What do you say to Americans who are scared right now? Obama's voice softened. I'd say the same thing I told my daughters when they were little. Fear grows when we stay silent. But when people stand up, when they demand accountability, Even the strongest forces can change. We're not powerless. We just have to care enough to act. The audience didn't cheer, didn't clap. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, the silence itself became a response. At home, people wiped their eyes. Others clenched their fists. For some, it was the first time in years they felt someone in power had spoken directly to them, not at them. But Obama wasn't finished yet, and what he revealed next would drag hidden conversations straight into the daylight. By the time the commercial break rolled in, producers were whispering into headsets, scrambling to cut together the most striking clips for replay. But Rachel Maddow knew she hadn't reached the heart of it yet. As the cameras returned, her tone sharpened. "Mr. President," she began, "you've mentioned private conversations. Can you tell us what exactly you heard and from whom?" Obama didn't rush. He leaned forward slightly, his fingertips pressed together, his cadence deliberate. "Rachel, let me be clear. These weren't whispered rumors. These were lawmakers, people who sit in the same chamber where I once served, speaking openly in private. They're worried about the survival of our institutions." Rachel's pen hovered over her notepad, her voice steady but curious. "What did they say?" Obama looked down for a moment, as if recalling the weight of those words. Then he spoke. "At that national security retreat, I had conversations with Republicans and Democrats alike. And the common theme wasn't partisanship, it was fear, real fear. They told me they feel trapped between loyalty to their party and loyalty to their country." The viewers at home could almost see the scene in their minds. A quiet retreat center in the mountains of Utah, snow still clinging to the ground, lawmakers gathered around tables with coffee cups, dropping their guard just long enough to admit their concerns. Obama described it vividly. One lawmaker, a Republican from the Midwest, told me, "I don't recognize my own party anymore. We built a reputation on law and order, on national security, but now, if you speak out, you're branded a traitor. So people stay quiet, they fall in line. And every time we do, the line moves further." Rachel interjected, "And you believe this silence is dangerous?" "Absolutely," Obama replied. "Silence isn't neutral. It allows the erosion to continue. And when the people entrusted with the nation's security choose silence over courage, the consequences ripple out far beyond Washington." The words carried across living rooms like an echo. In Dallas, a schoolteacher named Karen Delgado texted her sister, "This sounds like a movie, but it's real. They're admitting it." In Portland, a retired postal worker whispered to his grandson, "See, that's why elections matter. That's why truth matters." Obama pressed on, his tone unwavering. Another senator, this time from the West Coast, said something I'll never forget. He leaned across the table and told me, "We may already be crossing the line. Classified intelligence is being handled carelessly, and the people who know the most, our career officers, are being forced out. If this continues, we won't know what we've lost until it's too late." Rachel glanced up, her voice tight with disbelief. "And you're saying these were sitting senators, Republicans and Democrats, speaking directly to you?" "Yes," Obama said plainly. "These aren't anonymous sources. These are people whose names you'd recognize, people who will return to the Senate floor tomorrow and vote like nothing's wrong because they're afraid of political backlash. But in private, they're sounding the alarm." The contradiction was jarring. Senators warning of disaster behind closed doors, then smiling for cameras as if nothing were wrong. For many watching, it confirmed what they'd long suspected, that the truth whispered in private halls was very different from what was said on the Senate floor. Rachel's voice lowered. "Mr. President, did any of them ask you for advice?" Obama gave a faint smile, though it didn't soften the gravity of his words. "Yes. One of them asked me, 'What would you do if you were still president?' And I told him the truth. I would listen to the people who've spent their lives protecting this country, not dismiss them as enemies when they give uncomfortable advice." That single line spread like wildfire on social media. "Listen to the people who protect this country" became a rallying cry, quoted on posters in classrooms, even painted on the side of a bridge in Minneapolis within days. Rachel tapped her pen lightly on her desk. Why share these details now? Why risk putting these lawmakers under scrutiny? Obama's voice grew heavier. Because some of them won't speak up themselves, but Americans deserve to know what's being said behind closed doors. This isn't gossip. This is survival. And I'd rather face criticism for speaking out then regret staying quiet. The reaction across the country was electric. In Anchorage, Alaskans gathered outside a community center, murmuring about Senator Murkowski's name being brought into the light. Some defended her bravery, others condemned her, but no one ignored it. And as the camera zoomed closer on Obama's face, his eyes steady and calm, it was clear that his words weren't just meant for Rachel Maddow or for the audience in the studio. They were meant for history. But Obama's calm revelations were about to collide with the most shocking admission yet, one that carried a senator's name and couldn't be ignored. When Obama finally spoke Senator Lisa Murkowski's name, the air in the studio shifted. It wasn't just the mention of a Republican. It was the fact that this Republican was from Alaska, someone who had carved a reputation for independence but rarely strayed this far from her party's orbit. Rachel Maddow immediately leaned forward, her pen no longer moving across the page. "Senator Murkowski," she repeated as if to confirm she had heard correctly. "Yes," Obama replied. His voice didn't rise, but its certainty carried more power than any dramatic outburst could. "She told me herself. Standards are slipping," she said. "We may cross a line before anyone can stop it." Those were her words, Rachel, not mine. Rachel's eyes flickered toward the camera, a reflex that told the millions of viewers at home, "You just heard it too." The name exploded across America within minutes. In Anchorage, Alaskan radio host Brent Larkin interrupted his call-in show to announce it. "You're hearing this live. Obama just said Senator Murkowski believes the president is putting national security at risk." Callers flooded the lines, some furious, others applauding her candor. Back in the studio, Maddow's questions sharpened. "Mr. President quoting a sitting senator by name, that's extraordinary. Do you think she'll confirm it?" Obama didn't blink. "I can't speak for her, but I can tell you this. She said it in front of her colleagues. She didn't whisper. She didn't hide. She looked me in the eye and told me she was afraid of where this was heading." The gravity of his words made the moment feel less like television and more like testimony under oath. Rachel paused, then pressed. "And what was your reaction in that moment?" Obama exhaled slowly, choosing his words. "I told her I respected her courage, and I told her that history remembers those who stand up, even when it's hard." The audience in the studio sat silent, but in homes across the nation, viewers felt the weight of the exchange. People weren't just hearing politics. They were hearing confession and warning woven into one. In a small diner in Boise, a waitress named Hannah Scott replayed the clip on her phone between refills. "She said it," she whispered to a coworker. "She actually said it to him, and he's repeating it live. That's not nothing." Meanwhile, in Washington, word spread fast. Phones buzzed inside Senate offices. Staffers rushed into hallways, whispering updates. Obama just quoted Murkowski. Within minutes, reporters stationed outside the Capitol were live streaming reactions from senators ducking into elevators, most refusing to comment. But the most intense spotlight, naturally, turned on Murkowski herself. At that very hour, she was flying back from Anchorage to D.C. Her staff, glued to live coverage, knew the media storm waiting for her at Reagan National Airport would be unlike anything she'd faced before. Rachel Maddow, sensing the storm herself, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why Murkowski? Why do you think she told you this, when so many of her colleagues remained silent?" Obama looked directly into the camera. "Because deep down, she knows what's at stake. She may not agree with me politically on everything, but she knows loyalty to country must come before loyalty to a man." That line, simple as it was, ricocheted across social media like lightning. "Country over man" began trending within 20 minutes. High school students posted TikToks repeating the phrase. Church leaders included it in sermons. Veterans adopted it as a rallying cry. Back on set, Rachel tilted her head, her tone softening. "Do you think this will encourage others to speak out?" Obama nodded slightly. "Sometimes it takes one person to break the silence. That's how movements begin, not with a chorus, but with a single voice." In homes across the country, viewers felt the resonance of that truth. In Pittsburgh, a retired steelworker clenched his fist. "She said it first," he muttered, "but she won't be the last." The moment crystallized a broader truth, that America wasn't just watching a political interview, but witnessing the fragile first steps of dissent within Trump's own party. Rachel allowed a beat of silence before continuing. "So what comes next? If more senators share her concerns, what's the path forward?" Obama leaned back, his face thoughtful but firm. The path forward is honesty, transparency, and courage. None of those things should be partisan, but they'll only happen if people demand it. His words weren't theatrical. They were steady, but steady in the way a drumbeat steadies a march. Viewers at home knew he wasn't offering comfort so much as issuing a challenge. For Senator Murkowski, though, the challenge was immediate and personal. By the time her flight touched down, she would face cameras, microphones, and reporters pressing for confirmation, and every word she chose, or refused to choose, would matter. But Obama wasn't only placing pressure on Murkowski. He was preparing to widen the spotlight, pushing the entire Senate and even the president himself into the glare of accountability. The studio lights were warm against Obama's face, but his expression stayed cool, deliberate. By now, Rachel Maddow knew she had one of the most significant interviews of her career. Still, she pressed forward carefully, her tone equal parts journalist and witness to history. "Mr. President," she said, "you've quoted a Republican senator directly. You've said sitting lawmakers are afraid, but I need to ask you plainly, what is the danger you see if this continues?" Obama's answer was quiet, but the gravity in his voice silenced even the crew behind the cameras. "The danger," he said, "is that the erosion of our institutions will reach a point where we can't get them back. Intelligence agencies aren't just offices in Washington. They're the men and women who risk their lives overseas to bring us information that saves American lives. When their work is dismissed, when expertise is mocked, when truth itself becomes negotiable, the entire country is left vulnerable." The line hung heavy, carrying weight not only as a critique, but as a warning that felt less like politics and more like prophecy. Rachel leaned in. "So you believe we're at a breaking point?" Obama didn't flinch. "I believe we're closer than most Americans realize. And the reason I'm speaking out tonight is because people who've seen the classified briefings, people who understand what's at stake, are telling me they fear the worst. If we lose credibility with our allies, if they stop sharing intelligence because they don't trust this White House, our soldiers, our citizens, even our children are put at risk." His words painted a picture that viewers at home could visualize. Parents in Florida imagined their kids at school, protected by layers of unseen security built on shared intelligence. Veterans in Colorado thought of the friends they had lost in combat and how much depended on knowing what the enemy planned before it happened. Suddenly, this wasn't abstract, it was personal. Rachel's eyes searched his. "Do you believe President Trump understands these risks?" Obama allowed a small pause, then answered with precision. "I believe he treats national security as a performance, something to be packaged for a crowd. But this isn't theater. This is real life. And when leaders confuse applause with accountability, the costs are borne by ordinary Americans." That distinction, applause versus accountability, hit a nerve. Social media lit up with clips of that line. Journalists tweeted it instantly. Late-night hosts began scribbling notes for their monologues. In living rooms across the country, people repeated it aloud, as if testing the truth of it against their own experience. Rachel followed up. "Some would say you're being too cautious. Why not name every lawmaker you've spoken with? Why hold back?" Obama's gaze steadied on her. "Because my goal isn't to shame individuals. It's to wake up the American people. They need to know this isn't about partisanship. It's about survival of the system. If we only frame it as Democrats versus Republicans, we miss the point. The point is whether we still value truth, whether we still believe facts matter, and whether we're willing to defend the people who protect us, even when their message is inconvenient." The calm urgency of his words carried a moral clarity that resonated differently than the outrage dominating so much of public life. In a living room in Des Moines, a grandmother watching with her teenage grandson whispered, "He's talking to you, to your future." And the boy, eyes wide, didn't look away from the screen. Meanwhile, inside the West Wing, staffers huddled around televisions, exchanging worried glances. They knew this wasn't a typical Obama interview. This was a direct challenge to the president's leadership, aired live to millions. Rachel sensed the shift too. "Mr. President," she asked, "are you saying this is bigger than politics?" Obama nodded. "Much bigger. Democracy isn't self-sustaining. It survives because people defend it, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but always with conviction. What worries me is when people choose loyalty to a person over loyalty to principles. That's how democracies weaken, and we're watching that happen in real time. The audience in the studio remained locked in silence, not because they were disinterested, but because they were caught between shock and reflection. It wasn't the kind of moment that invited applause, it invited thought. Rachel, realizing she had struck the core of his message, asked one final question in that segment. What do you want Americans to do with what you're saying tonight? Obama's eyes softened, but his tone carried an unmistakable urgency. Pay attention, speak out, don't let fear silence you. Because the truth is this: silence is complicity. And when we look back on this moment, history won't remember the tweets or the speeches. It'll remember who stood up when it mattered most. The camera held on his face as the words settled in. Across the country, viewers weren't just watching a former president. They were hearing a warning that felt both historic and immediate. But as Obama's words echoed through households and offices, the reaction outside that studio was already spiraling into something no one could fully control. Within minutes of Obama's final words in that segment, the digital world caught fire. It started with a single clip posted by MSNBC's official account, a 40-second video where Obama calmly repeated Senator Murkowski's warning. The caption read, "Obama, standards are slipping and we may cross a line before anyone can stop it." By the time the clip finished buffering for most viewers, it was already being retweeted thousands of times. But this wasn't just another trending story. Something about the delivery, the calm, almost judicial tone, made it feel different. By the end of the night, hashtags like "and institution over party," "Obama America first," and "heck country over man" dominated timelines. Even those who normally avoided politics found the words impossible to ignore. In a coffee shop in Madison, Wisconsin, college students huddled around a laptop replaying the clip. One of them, a political science major, shook his head. "That's not campaign talk, that's a warning." Another chimed in. "And if Murkowski really said it, that's huge." Across the country in Jacksonville, Florida, truck drivers on break gathered at a gas station counter. The TV above the soda machines replayed the interview. A driver named Phil muttered, "Man's calm as ever, but you can hear it in his voice. He's scared for the country." The ripple didn't stop with ordinary citizens. Cable networks scrambled to reorient coverage. CNN cut into a panel discussion to replay the clip in full. Fox News, initially dismissive, soon shifted strategy. Within an hour, their commentators weren't ignoring the story. They were attacking it, calling it political theater, and accusing Obama of undermining a sitting president. Meanwhile, YouTube became flooded with reaction videos. Influencers across the spectrum weighed in, some dissecting every line Obama delivered, others turning it into fiery monologues of their own. In less than 12 hours, the original MSNBC upload had racked up 5 million views, but the true chaos brewed in Washington. Inside the White House, aides rushed into late-night meetings, each with a different idea of how to respond. One advisor argued for ignoring Obama completely. "Don't give him oxygen," he said. Another slammed the table. "We can't ignore it. He just dragged Murkowski into this, and now reporters are going to be camping outside her house in Anchorage." By the time midnight rolled around, the situation had already leaked to the press. Reporters tweeted that Trump's inner circle was in panic mode, scrambling for talking points. At the same time, Murkowski's staff phones rang non-stop. Constituents demanded answers, journalists requested comments. Her communications director typed draft after draft of possible statements, none of which could fully contain the storm. Back in Alaska, ordinary citizens gathered in diners and homes, debating whether their senator's alleged words were brave or reckless. One fisherman interviewed outside a dockside bar in Kodiak told a reporter, "If she really said that, good for her. Somebody had to." Another shook his head. "If she said it, she sold out her party. That's betrayal." The country wasn't just watching politics. It was watching trust fracture in real time. And still, the viral spread continued. Obama's words were clipped into memes, spliced into TikTok montages with dramatic music, even remixed into a rap song that hit SoundCloud within 24 hours. In classrooms, teachers used the clip to spark debates about democracy. In churches, pastors quoted the warning in sermons about truth and integrity. Rachel Maddow, meanwhile, found herself at the center of the storm too. Overnight, her ratings skyrocketed. Viewers described the interview as history captured live. She gave no interviews the following morning, letting the tape speak for itself. The fallout extended internationally as well. European news outlets covered the story prominently, noting Obama's warning about America losing credibility abroad. In London, one anchor summarized it bluntly. The former U.S. president says America's allies may already be shifting away from Washington, and that message carries weight. As morning broke across the U.S., newspapers printed front-page headlines that told the story in stark terms. Obama, silence is no longer an option. Murkowski named in bombshell interview. Former president warns of national security risk. For millions of Americans sipping coffee or grabbing the morning paper, those headlines turned a television moment into a national conversation. But in the West Wing, panic hardened into anger. Trump's advisors convinced him that staying silent would look weak. Plans for a press conference were drafted, tweets were written, revised, and then drafted again. The president himself paced furious, demanding to know why Obama was being given airtime to trash him. Obama, however, had already moved on from the interview. By sunrise, he was back in his Washington home, quietly reviewing notes and preparing for the next wave. For him, the purpose had never been about a single night's television ratings. It had been about starting a conversation the country could no longer ignore. But Trump wasn't the kind of man to let that go unanswered, and his counterattack would set the stage for an even bigger clash. By morning, the White House press corps buzzed with energy. Reporters clustered near the briefing room, their phones lighting up with fresh alerts every few seconds. The president had announced a mid-morning press conference, an unusual move that suggested one thing. Donald Trump was preparing to hit back at Barack Obama's late-night bombshell. Inside the West Wing, the atmosphere was chaotic. Staffers debated over every word of the draft statement. Some pushed for restraint, warning that an angry tirade would only amplify Obama's credibility. Others insisted Trump should go on the offensive, turning the narrative against the former president. But ultimately, everyone knew there was only one voice that mattered. Trump stormed around the Oval Office, clutching printouts of overnight headlines. He waved one above his head. Obama warns of national security crisis under Trump. His face flushed red. Can you believe this? He's not president anymore. He's nothing. And now everybody's listening to him like he's the king of the world. Unbelievable. Advisor Stephen Miller leaned forward cautiously. Mr. President, if you take the stage, you can flip this. Remind people Obama's the one who left the mess behind. Say he's undermining democracy by attacking you on foreign policy. Frame it as disloyal. Trump jabbed a finger toward him. Exactly, disloyal. That's what it is. He spun toward Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. You tell them he's a disgrace. He's jealous. He's trying to stay relevant. Nobody cares about him. This is my White House, mine. Kayleigh nodded quickly, though the tightness in her jaw betrayed her nerves. She knew the reporters were sharpening their questions, waiting to trap the president into reacting. By 11 a.m., the press briefing room was packed, wall to wall. Cameras lined the back row. Microphones hovered like hawks above the crowd. When Trump strode in, the chatter cut off instantly. He stood at the podium, gripping its edges, his eyes darting across the sea of reporters. Okay, he began, his voice already rising. I saw what the failed former president said last night. Total disgrace. Nobody's ever treated a sitting president like this in history. Nobody. And to use a Republican senator's name? Shameful. Lisa Murkowski should be embarrassed. Very embarrassed. Hands shot up immediately, but Trump pressed on, waving dismissively. Let me tell you something. We've got the best national security. The best. Stronger than ever. People tell me this all the time. The generals, the best generals. They say we've never been safer. And Barack Obama, he knows nothing about it. Nothing. He's just bitter because our economy is booming, our military is respected again, and the American people know I'm doing an incredible job. Tremendous job. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Mr. President, Obama quoted senators directly. Do you deny those conversations happened? Trump's face hardened. Fake. Fake conversations. Totally made up. You know how he is. He was always good at reading a teleprompter. That's it. But he doesn't know what's happening in this White House. Nobody tells him anything. He's irrelevant. Another reporter shouted, Do you think Senator Murkowski owes you an explanation? Trump seized the moment. Absolutely. She should come forward right now and say it's not true. If she doesn't, it tells you everything you need to know. Disloyal people. And Republicans who are disloyal, we don't need them. The declaration sent ripples through the room. Threatening a sitting senator on live television was bold, even for Trump. Reporters scribbled furiously, already framing their headlines. As the questions flew, Trump's anger only grew. He pointed directly at a CNN correspondent. "You people love Obama, you love him, but he left the world in chaos. ISIS everywhere, North Korea a mess, Iran out of control. He did nothing, nothing. And now he wants to lecture me about security? No thanks." The briefing stretched nearly 40 minutes, longer than aides had recommended. When Trump finally left the podium, he didn't wait for Kayleigh to close out. He simply stormed back through the door, leaving chaos in his wake. Cable networks cut in immediately. CNN called it a defensive tirade. Fox News praised Trump for standing his ground against Obama's smear campaign. MSNBC replayed Obama's original clip side by side with Trump's rebuttal, letting the contrast speak for itself. Meanwhile, Senator Murkowski's name dominated every headline. Reporters camped outside her D.C. townhouse. Microphones clustered outside her office in the Hart Senate building. Her aides whispered nervously, dodging questions as long as possible. But the pressure was mounting. Trump had put her on the spot. If she denied Obama's account, she risked looking dishonest. If she confirmed it, she risked open war with the president and her party. And across America, ordinary citizens debated fiercely. At a barbershop in St. Louis, men argued over whether Murkowski was brave or reckless. In Phoenix, a group of veterans debated Obama's warning while watching Trump's press conference on mute. The divide deepened, but one truth was undeniable. The story was no longer just about Obama. It was about the cracks forming within the president's own party. But the pressure cooker wasn't done. Murkowski herself would soon be forced to speak, and her response could change everything. The cameras were waiting before Lisa Murkowski even stepped off her plane at Reagan National Airport. Journalists clustered near the arrival gate, their microphones extended like weapons. She tried to keep her eyes down, her carry-on bag slung over her shoulder, but the swarm engulfed her within seconds. "Senator, did you really tell President Obama the president is putting national security at risk?" one shouted. "Do you stand by those words?" another pressed. "Are you afraid of retaliation from the White House?" a third added. Murkowski's security detail guided her through the crowd, but she paused briefly, turning her head toward the reporters. Her voice was firm, though her words were few. "I'll be addressing this with my constituents and my colleagues. That's all I'll say right now." It wasn't a denial, and that made the headlines burn even hotter. By the time she reached her office in the Hart Senate building, cameras were already set up outside. Staffers huddled inside, scrambling to prepare talking points, but the senator waved them off. "No pre-written statement," she said quietly. "This isn't about spin. This is about truth." That afternoon, Murkowski emerged to face the press herself. Her auburn hair framed a face that looked more determined than shaken. Dozens of microphones jutted toward her as she began. "I've seen the coverage of President Obama's interview. And yes," she said, pausing for just a heartbeat, "I did express concern about the state of our institutions. I did say that standards are slipping, and I did warn that we may cross a line before anyone can stop it." Gasps rippled through the reporters, confirmation clear, unmistakable. "But," she continued, raising her hand to quiet the frenzy, "let me be clear. My words were not meant as an attack on President Trump personally. They were a reflection of what I and many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are witnessing. Institutions that should remain steady are being treated like political chess pieces. That is dangerous, and it's my duty as a senator to speak the truth as I see it." The reaction was immediate. Reporters shouted questions. "Senator, are you breaking from your party? Do you fear retaliation from the president? Do you regret what you said?" Murkowski held her ground. "I took an oath to the Constitution, not to any one man. That oath means more than party loyalty. And if speaking the truth carries consequences, so be it. I'd rather answer to history than to fear." Her words landed with the force of a hammer blow. Within minutes, cable news channels were airing the clip in rotation. Twitter lit up with new hashtags, hashtag answer to history and hashtag standards matter. Across the nation, the reactions reflected the country's fracture. In Anchorage, Alaskans debated fiercely outside a grocery store. One woman, clutching her cart, said to a stranger, "She's doing the right thing. It's about time someone said it out loud." Another shot back. She's betraying the president. Alaska needs to remember that come election time. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Murkowski's colleagues reacted in hushed tones. Some Republican senators privately applauded her courage, even sending discreet texts of support. Others grumbled that she was giving Democrats ammunition. One conservative aide muttered in a hallway, "She's finished. The base will never forgive her." But Murkowski herself seemed strangely calm. In a private moment with her chief of staff, she confessed, "This isn't about surviving the next election. It's about whether I can sleep at night knowing I kept quiet. And I can't." The White House, predictably, erupted. Trump blasted her in a series of tweets, calling her a phony Republican and a disgrace to Alaska. In a hastily arranged Fox News interview, he doubled down, claiming Murkowski was parroting Obama's lies and working for the Democrats. His supporters cheered the attack, but to many Americans, the contrast was striking. Murkowski's measured confession against Trump's firestorm of insults. Cable news panels debated through the night. Was Murkowski a traitor to her party or a patriot defending principle? Analysts dissected her every word, noting how rarely senators broke ranks so openly. One commentator on CNN declared, "This may be the first crack in the dam. Others are watching closely." For ordinary Americans, her statement carried both risk and relief. In Louisville, Kentucky, a father told his teenage daughter, "See, speaking up is hard, but sometimes it's the only thing that matters." In Salem, Oregon, a retiree called into a radio show, voice shaking with emotion. She had the guts to say what so many are thinking. "I don't care what party you're in. That's leadership." But not everyone saw it as courage. Conservative talk radio blasted Murkowski as a sellout, warning that Republicans who sided with her would face primary challengers. In diners, on job sites, in church parking lots, the debates raged on. As the night wore on, Murkowski returned to her townhouse, slipping past reporters and into the quiet of her living room. She sat down, exhaled, and whispered to herself words no camera could capture. This was never about politics. This was about conscience. But her act of candor wasn't the end. It was the spark. And soon, the debate would grow beyond one senator, beyond Obama, even beyond Trump himself, into a nationwide reckoning about loyalty, truth, and democracy. The next 48 hours turned into something Washington hadn't seen in years, a political story that bled out of cable news and into ordinary life. You couldn't walk into a hardware store in Omaha or a coffee shop in Fresno without overhearing people talk about Obama, Trump, and Murkowski. What had begun as a tense interview on MSNBC was now a full-blown national conversation. On Sunday morning, the political talk shows set the tone. Analysts leaned on their screens with grim faces, replaying the clips again and again. One veteran journalist on Meet the Press said bluntly, "This isn't about partisan squabbles anymore. This is about the integrity of the system." On CNN, a former intelligence officer went further. When a Republican senator admits privately and then confirms publicly that standards are slipping, the country needs to ask, slipping toward what? The weight of those questions reached beyond studios. In Los Angeles, a middle-aged mother named Christina Alvarez watched the coverage with her teenage sons. "This is why you pay attention to history," she told them. "We're living through it. And one day, you'll be asked where you stood." In Dayton, Ohio, an auto worker named Ron McKee argued with his coworkers over lunch. "Look, I voted for Trump twice, but if Obama's right and even Republicans are worried, maybe it's time to take a hard look at what's going on." His friend shot back, "Or maybe it's just politics like always. Don't let the media brainwash you." The table divided, mirroring the nation itself. Meanwhile, world leaders began weighing in. Germany's Der Spiegel ran a headline, "Obama warns of U.S. democratic decline." In Paris, a French anchor asked pointedly, "If America can't trust its own president with intelligence, why should Europe?" The story had crossed oceans, feeding into conversations about America's role in the world. Back home, the conversation turned deeply personal. Churches devoted sermons to the subject of truth versus loyalty. College professors used the clips in civics lectures. High school students debated the meaning of patriotism in their government classes. In one Atlanta classroom, a student stood up and said, "If leaders are scared to tell the truth, maybe it's our job to demand it." The room went quiet, then filled with applause. In Washington, however, the response was more complicated. Senate hallways buzzed with whispered debates. Some Republican senators avoided reporters entirely, ducking into elevators or slipping outside doors. Others spoke in vague phrases about maintaining focus on the American people while refusing to address Murkowski's confirmation. Behind closed doors, aides warned their bosses, "The public is watching. You can't keep dodging this." Democrats, meanwhile, seized on the moment. Senator Sherrod Brown told a crowd in Cleveland, "This is bigger than party. When someone like Senator Murkowski is sounding the alarm, it tells us the danger is real." His words drew cheers, but the message wasn't meant for Democrats alone. It was a challenge to Republicans still on the fence. The media frenzy reached a fever pitch when footage surfaced of ordinary Americans confronting their representatives at town halls. In Spokane, Washington, a Republican congressman was grilled by a constituent, "Do you believe Obama or do you believe Trump? You can't hide behind silence anymore." The crowd erupted in applause. In Phoenix, another town hall nearly spiraled out of control as voters demanded to know whether their senator shared Murkowski's concerns. For many Americans, the story stopped being about Obama's interview and became about them, their role, their voice, their responsibility. Conversations that might once have felt abstract suddenly felt urgent. One commentator on MSNBC captured it best. "What began as a warning from Obama has now become a test for every American. Are you loyal to power or to principle?" At the same time, the divide deepened further. Conservative talk radio painted Obama as an outsider meddling in government affairs, accusing Murkowski of betrayal. Callers raged about disloyalty, some threatening to organize primary challenges against any Republican who dared echo her concerns. Yet, despite the noise, something had shifted. Polls released that week showed a subtle but clear change. Growing numbers of independents, and even some Republicans, now admitted they had concerns about how Trump handled intelligence. It wasn't a tidal wave, but it was a crack. Obama himself stayed quiet after the interview, declining requests for follow-ups. But silence didn't mean absence. His words replayed in endless loops across television, social media, and conversation. In a way, his absence made the warning more powerful. He had spoken once, and that was enough. Rachel Maddow reflected on it during her program later that week. "This wasn't about Obama making a comeback," she told viewers. "This was about a former president telling us what he heard and leaving it to the American people to decide what they'll do with it." And for millions of Americans, that decision weighed heavily. Were they going to shrug it off as more political theater, or were they going to demand more from their leaders, truth, transparency, accountability? But as the debate stretched from kitchen tables to Senate floors, the question looming over everyone remained. What lesson would America take from this moment? And would it be enough to change the course ahead? By the end of the week, America felt like it was holding its breath. The headlines hadn't slowed. Obama's interview still replayed on every news cycle. Murkowski's confirmation echoed through Capitol Hill, and Trump's furious rebuttals filled every rally and press conference. Yet behind the noise, there was something deeper taking shape. A realization that the country was staring at more than a political feud. It was staring at a choice. At a diner in Wichita, a group of farmers sat around a corner booth, mugs of coffee steaming in front of them. One of them, a man in his 60s named Harold Jensen, tapped the table with his calloused hand. "You know what bothers me? It's not that politicians argue. They always have. It's that the truth is treated like a toy. Obama sounded steady, like he wanted to protect something. Trump sounded like he wanted to win a fight. And I'm tired of fights. I want leaders." In Los Angeles, a group of college students sat on the lawn outside their dorm, earbuds in, watching the clips again. A young woman named Tasha leaned back and said, "We grew up with the idea that democracy is untouchable. But what if it isn't? What if it disappears because no one defended it?" Her friend replied quietly, "Then it's on us to defend it." Across the country, families, neighbors, coworkers, and strangers wrestled with the same dilemma. Obama's message had cut through because it didn't sound like politics. It sounded like responsibility. His warning that silence is complicity was no longer just about senators in Washington. It was about every person watching, every citizen deciding whether to speak up or stay quiet. In Washington, Trump doubled down. At a rally in Pennsylvania, he thundered to a cheering crowd, "Obama wants to lecture us about democracy. He had his chance and he failed. We are stronger now than ever before." His supporters roared, But even in that arena, cameras caught a few faces in the crowd looking uncertain, as though the echoes of Murkowski's words still lingered in their minds. Meanwhile, Murkowski herself faced the weight of her choice. She received hate mail and threats, but also letters of gratitude from Americans who thanked her for her honesty. One handwritten note, mailed from a veteran in Montana, read simply, "Thank you for remembering your oath." She kept it tucked in her desk drawer, a reminder that courage always comes with a cost. Back on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow reflected with her viewers. This moment isn't about one interview, or one senator, or even one president. It's about a question we all have to ask ourselves. What do we owe to our country when we see the truth? Do we look away, or do we face it? The lesson resonated far beyond the political sphere. In schools, teachers use the clips to remind students that democracy isn't permanent. It must be defended. In churches, pastors spoke about moral courage. In union halls and veterans groups, people repeated Obama's line, "Silence is complicity." It became more than a phrase. It became a test of conscience. And through it all, Obama himself stayed quiet, choosing not to add fuel to the fire. His single appearance, his calm delivery, was enough. The contrast between his restraint and Trump's constant barrage of words became its own message. Leadership isn't about volume, it's about clarity. The moral of the story wasn't complicated, it was timeless. Power fades, politics shift. But principles, truth, accountability, loyalty to country above self, are what endure. Obama's interview had reminded Americans of that, not by shouting, but by speaking plainly. The week closed with a quiet Sunday evening. Families gathered around dinner tables. Some argued, some agreed, but almost everyone had something to say. The silence that Obama warned against had been broken, and perhaps that was the greatest lesson. Democracy isn't defended by speeches alone. It's defended by ordinary people deciding that truth matters, that courage matters, and that their voices matter. So if you're listening to this story now, don't let it end as just another headline or another piece of political theater. Let it live as a reminder. The health of a democracy depends on the choices of its people. Speak out, stand up, pay attention. Because silence is complicity, and history will remember which side you chose. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe for more. Your voice, your awareness, and your willingness to care about these moments are what keep conversations like this alive.